The sound of boots echoed against the metal floor of the military transport. She wasn't a soldier, not officially. Just another face carrying crates of ammunition. Her uniform plain, her presence unnoticed. But then the general's eyes locked onto the small patch stitched onto her sleeve. A patch that told a story no one expected. A story that would change the way every man in that room looked at her. The hum of the engines drowned out most conversations. But inside the belly of the military transport plane, silence carried its own weight. Rows of soldiers sat strapped into metal benches, their eyes fixed on the floor or staring past the noise, each man lost in his thoughts. War has a way of carving silence into even the loudest of men. Among them sat a woman who seemed, at first glance, to be nothing more than a supply handler. Her uniform wasn't polished, her boots carried dust from another airfield, and her name tag had been scuffed by time and travel. The only thing that separated her from the cargo stacked along the fuselage were the crates of ammunition she had helped load, one by one, without complaint. To the others, she was background noise. Someone doing her job, someone who didn't belong in the spotlight. But there was something different about her stillness. Unlike the restless shifting of young recruits or the casual chatter of veterans, she carried herself with quiet composure. She didn't fidget, didn't seek acknowledgement, didn't try to fit in. She was present, yet distant, like someone who had already seen more than she wished to share. No one asked her name. No one asked why she was there. To them, she was just the one who carried ammo, nothing more, nothing less. The general, however, noticed things others didn't. His eyes were sharp, trained by decades of reading men and women on battlefields where hesitation cost lives. At first, even he dismissed her as a civilian assistant or a logistics runner, useful but unremarkable. Until a shift of her jacket caught his attention. There, sewn onto the sleeve of her fatigues, was a patch. Small, worn, easy to overlook. But to anyone who knew its history, its meaning was unmistakable. The general's gaze froze. His breath stilled. That patch wasn't standard issue. It wasn't decorative. It was the kind of patch you didn't wear unless you had earned it. Through fire, through blood, through a chapter of war most men tried to forget. The soldiers around her hadn't noticed yet. They were still locked in their thoughts, some tapping their boots against the metal floor, others cradling their rifles like lifelines. But the general knew. In that moment, the hum of the engines seemed to fade, replaced by the weight of recognition pressing down on him. Who was she? Why was she here, quietly hauling crates like a nameless supply hand, when that patch told a different story, a story that carried with it respect, reverence, and the kind of silent soldiers only reserved for legends. The general leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her sleeve. It was the beginning of a revelation that would change the atmosphere in that cabin, and none of the men around them had any idea what was about to unfold. The general had seen countless patches in his life. Some told of units that no longer existed, swallowed by time or politics. Others marked campaigns most would rather erase from memory. But this patch was not just fabric and thread. It was a relic of survival, of unthinkable sacrifice. And the fact that it was stitched onto her sleeve left him with more questions than answers. He let his eyes linger, confirming what he already knew. It was the insignia of a task force so secretive that its name never made headlines, only whispered through after-action reports buried in archives. Those who wore it had gone on missions that demanded absolute silence, missions that often left no survivors to tell the tale. That patch was no ornament. It was proof of belonging to a story that very few lived long enough to recount. The general's chest tightened as memory tugged at him. He remembered the briefings, the redacted pages, the hushed conversations where men in uniforms like his traded glances heavy with things unsaid. That patch was not meant to be seen in public, not meant to be worn casually in the open. It was a symbol of both honor and loss. But here it was, worn by a woman who sat quietly among crates of ammunition, not flaunting it, not explaining it, just carrying it like a burden stitched into her skin. He couldn't stay silent. Leaning forward, his voice low so only she could hear, he asked, "Where did you get that patch?" Her head turned slowly, eyes calm, unreadable. For a moment, She said nothing, and he wondered if she'd ignore him. But then, in a voice steady and stripped of pride, she answered, "I earned it." The simplicity of the statement struck him harder than any long explanation could. No boasting, no theatrics, just the truth, plain and undeniable. His mind raced. If she had earned it, that meant she had been there, embedded in operations so dangerous they had no room for recognition. That meant she had stood where others had fallen, fought in places where the lines between survival and death blurred into chaos. And yet, she was here, hauling boxes, quiet and unseen. The general straightened in his seat, the weight of her words pressing against him. He realized that if the others noticed the patch, if they understood what it meant, the atmosphere in the cabin would shift in an instant. Soldiers who had dismissed her as just another handler would see her differently. Respect would ripple through them, silent but profound. For now, though, it was just between the two of them. A shared understanding, born from history written in blood and silence. The general's gaze returned to the patch once more, and he knew this was no accident. She wasn't simply carrying ammo. She was carrying a legacy, one that most men couldn't even imagine surviving. And soon the others would see it too. The moment the general's eyes lingered on her sleeve for too long, the soldiers around them began to notice. At first it was just curiosity, a glance here, a half-second double-take there. But soon, one of the younger privates squinted, leaned forward, and whispered to the man beside him. The whisper spread like wildfire. Heads turned. Eyes sharpened. One by one, the soldiers began to realize what they were looking at. That patch. Men who had been slouched in fatigue straightened their backs. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the sound of boots tapping nervously against the floor ceased. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted in a way that words couldn't capture. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was respect, sudden and heavy, settling over them like a cloak. For these men, battle-hardened, scarred, many of them decorated themselves. There were few things that could humble them. But that patch wasn't just cloth. It was history. It was survival against odds that should have broken the strongest of men. Seeing it on her uniform was like being in the presence of something sacred. The soldiers who moments earlier had ignored her now couldn't look away. A sergeant cleared his throat, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find words strong enough. Another man shifted awkwardly, almost ashamed that he hadn't acknowledged her before. She noticed, of course. She always did. But she didn't revel in it. She didn't smirk, didn't straighten her shoulders to bask in their newfound attention. She remained as she had been since boarding the plane. Quiet, steady, calm. If anything, her stillness only deepened the weight of the moment. The general finally spoke, his voice louder this time, directed at everyone. "You boys should understand something. That patch doesn't just appear on a sleeve. It's not handed out, and it's not for show. You earn it. And if she's wearing it, it means she's walked through fire most of you can't even imagine." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Not disbelief, but awe. These were men who had trained, fought, bled, and survived their own battles. Yet they knew, instinctively, that whatever story lay behind that patch was beyond even their toughest days. For the first time since she had stepped aboard, the soldiers saw her not as the one carrying ammo, but as something else entirely. A survivor, a warrior, a legend disguised as ordinary. No one saluted, no one cheered. Instead, there was silence. A silence thicker than the roar of the engines, a silence that said more than words ever could. Respect doesn't always shout. Sometimes it bows its head quietly. And in that silence, the general's gaze met hers again. She gave nothing away, not even a nod. But in her eyes he saw the weight of memory, the kind of memory that stitched itself into every fiber of that patch. The kind of memory no one would dare forget.